Okay, go ahead and start anytime.
Okay, cool. Let me turn up my volume a little bit. All right. Okay, hey, welcome everybody. So here's what we're going to do today. We are going to talk about transitioning to new construction. And kind of the way I'm going to set this up is I've got a little spiel prepared, kind of some of the more important things to think about when it comes to transitioning to new construction. But if you've got questions, I think I'll stop off along the way, and you can either type them in the box or alert Dan to it, and we can just kind of field questions along the way. Because I have a feeling that you know, I'll cover most of the things that I think are important, but I know there's going to be questions that are maybe land in between some of these topics or just some clarification things. So it'll be important to you know, address those along the way. So if you have a question, we'll have a few stopping points. If you don't, we can wait until the end, and then we'll take a bunch of questions at the end, and we can kind of go through anything that I talked about at that point. So, all right. So the topic of this month's webinar is going to be transitioning your business to doing new construction, or transitioning to adding new construction in addition to everything else that you're doing. And so this is one of my personally favorite topics. You know, obviously I don't need to prep much for a webinar like this because it's something that I know a lot about, but I also am really passionate about it. Something that we did long ago now, well, probably what, 6 years ago now maybe, that we transitioned to starting to do new construction, and so somewhere around there, and I'm really, really glad that we did. It was kind of a, you know, it was an interesting transition though, because it wasn't something that it was something I wanted to do, but I didn't do it until I absolutely had to do it. And, you know, I wish that I had done it a little sooner, and it wasn't because I absolutely had to do it. But either way, we got here, and I'm glad that we did. So for those of you out there that aren't in a project where it forces you to transition to new construction, you've got the option of obviously doing it on your own, which, if at all possible, I would suggest that you do it, or at least look into doing it. I know there are certain markets where it's just it's a little more challenging, but you know, or the numbers just don't quite make sense yet, and that's fine. But at least recognize that, and you know, as an opportunity presents itself, you've got the ability to if you want to. So, all right, so let's start off with basically what I'm going to start off with is reasons why you know, transitioning into new construction is a good thing, and I'll go through. I've got 7 reasons that I want to kind of dissect and go through. Basically, which are the positive reasons why you should add it to your arsenal. The next thing I want to go through is actually making the transition, and I've got, I don't know, a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk about that's kind of the nuts and bolts in terms of what you need and who you need on your team, and as potential subcontractors and team members in order to make that transition. Kind of, you know, let's talk about the void between rehabbing and new construction, who you need in that void in order to fill it. So that's what we're going to go through, and that'll be the majority of the presentation, and then from there we can talk about questions. So first thing I want to talk about is, like I mentioned, is reasons to start doing new construction. And the number one reason, well, this isn't in any particular order, but this is the first reason that I think is really important, is that number one, it opens you up to monetizing leads you currently are not. Now, I know that a lot of you flip teardowns, and that's great, and you can monetize them that way, but to be able to take a teardown type lead and monetize it yourself through knocking it down, building a new house, knocking it down, splitting the lot, building 2 houses, or whatever it might be, it really causes your real estate investing business to grow up a lot. It becomes a much, I think, healthier business because you have a little more leeway in terms of what you can do. So basically, bottom line is it opens you up to monetizing more leads yourself, which I think is a great thing for actually building your business. So that's, for us, that, you know, really opened the door to going after a bunch of leads that we wouldn't have gone after before, or looking at leads that came into our funnel in a totally different way than we would have before. And it, you know, by virtue of those things, it caused the business to really grow up a lot. We went from being just a house flipper to, you know, being a company that does flip houses and renovates houses, but we also are now, you know, building new construction. We're doing development deals. We're doing things that basically make us a lot more money at the end of the day, because now we have the ability to do it. And that's why we're in this business. We want to continually learn, you know, and master the skills necessary in real estate redevelopment, whether it be rehabbing, building, and subdividing, whatever it is, so that we can make more money along the way. and obviously master our craft also. The second reason is higher profit margins. Generally speaking, new construction is going to have higher profit margins in a lot of the major metro areas where you guys are located. Now, again, in the Midwest, super low-priced markets comparatively to like West Coast or East Coast, the higher priced markets in those areas, if you're in one of those low-priced markets, it's going to be a little bit tougher. You're going to have to pick and choose your areas a little more wisely in terms of what the price points are in order to give yourself enough room to be able to buy the property, split the property, or tear down the old house, build a new house, and still have room there. That's why a lot of those types of markets, rehabbing is what a lot of people do, and very few people transition to new construction because there's just not as much opportunity there. The only way that you create opportunity there is buying big tracts of land, chopping them up into so many lots that your cost basis for each lot is almost zero, and then building from there. So that's where the challenge comes in, or the maybe not higher profit margin areas of the country would be. But for those of us that have, reasonably priced markets and higher end areas within those markets, generally new construction is going to have a higher profit margin attached to it than rehabbing, especially for those of us that have the skill sets, to be able to go out there and find the inventory in those types of areas via marketing, which is obviously one of the things that we harp on a lot here in the DFA. The number 3 thing is going to be the fact that if you do new construction, there's a lot less in-between labor. So, we're talking about those kind of in-between guys that do some of your demo labor, just all the in-between stuff. Like today at our rehab project, we've got guys that are finishing pulling nails, right, out of the framing from the old lath and plaster, and they're pulling down a big, kind of covered carport thing off the back of this place. So it's in between low-level labor, or it's in between labor. Usually you have low-level laborers kind of doing those kind of things, and, quite honestly, that's a pain in the ass from a business owner perspective to have to manage people like that continually. I've done it for years, but it always comes with a challenge. Or challenges, people problems, they've got money problems, there's always more challenges there, and that's business, that's the way it goes. But when you do new construction, my point is that there's virtually none of that in-between labor. The only in-between labor you really have is making sure the job site's cleaned and picked up on any given day. So there's a lot less of it, which means it's a lot easier to manage. You can sub out virtually everything, and you don't need to carry a lot of in-between labor to do those kind of in-between type tasks. So that's kind of a big thing, especially as your company grows and you start doing a lot of rehabs and you carry people like that, or you have people like that working for you on a continual basis. You'll really know what I'm talking about here. Let me grab a drink and then I'll keep going. So number 4 is going to be more predictable construction costs. When you start getting into bigger rehabs, construction costs, you can ballpark it, but, when was the last time you were actually right? Probably not very often. There's always going to be you have to have a contingency reserve, and most of the time you eat through that pretty quickly and you end up quite a bit more than what you thought. That's just the nature of the beast. That's the nature of big rehabs. And that's the one thing, for us, we really try and make sure we buy them cheap because it always runs over. It's just inevitable. With new construction, it's a lot easier to pencil exactly where you're going to be. Now, there are some variables there that we can talk about that might, swing those numbers a little bit, but they're pretty obvious variables. You should be able to tell for the most part initially. Sometimes there's more in excavation than you think, just because you think that the lot's flatter than it is or something like that, or you don't think as many loads of dirt need to be taken off as end up having to. But for the most part, you can predict your costs. So, for example, for us, we're building between 125 and 133 a square foot for our higher end products, and that's we know where we're going to be. So when we buy something, there's not a whole lot of mystery to where we're going to land financially. The only mystery is, okay, exactly what is it going to sell for, and we give ourselves obviously a little bit of a range, and we decide based on the lower end of that range if it's worth doing the project. If we get higher, fantastic. It's a great win. But focusing on the construction cost side of it, we can be very, very accurate in terms of what it's going to cost to build. Now, of course, when we build a newer plan that we haven't built before, there's a little bit more X factor there. But when you're rebuilding a plan that you built before, you virtually know exactly what it's going to cost. Now, lately, within the last 12 to 18 months, a lot of subcontractor prices have continually gone up as well, just because they're busier and they can demand it. So you got to factor that in a little bit. But in terms of knowing where you're going to be, new construction is a lot easier to pencil than doing big rehabs. That's for sure. Number 5, and this is one that I'm so glad that I don't have to hear anymore, or that we hear not nearly as much because we do a lot more new construction, is nobody complains about what you bought the property for, right? All you guys that have done a number of projects, I'm sure you've gone to sell a project and the listing agent or the buyer's agent, is complaining to your listing agent about, or you if you are the listing agent, how much you bought the property for and how much you're trying to sell it for. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. It happens a lot more as the market cools than in a hotter market with low inventory, but it happens to all of us. And whenever I hear that question, I just want to grab somebody and punch them through the phone. But it's inevitable. You're going to hear it, and you're going to hear it quite a bit in the rehabbing game. It's just the way that it goes, because people want to try and justify giving you a lower offer because they don't think that you should make the money that you're making, as if it was less work to do a big rehab, which it's not. But when you build new construction, nobody ever asks you that. They don't care. It's like it doesn't even matter what you paid for the property prior, because they cannot, for the life of them, conceptualize what it is that you spent on construction costs. It's like this big black hole. They just don't know. We just sold a $2 million home. We paid $565 for the lot. Not once did they say, hey, you're selling us this house for $2 million. You only paid $565 for the property. Never even came up, not once. And so, that's a pretty, we had a pretty large profit margin in that deal. And, it's an extreme example, but even in an extreme example, nobody asked. So that's the one thing that's nice about it. It's like nobody even cares what it is that you paid for it. They just care about whether or not it appraises for what it is you're selling for. And that leads me into the next, number 6, which is there's less appraisal issues when you're doing new construction, because appraisers tend to comp it only to other new construction, whereas if you're doing a big rehab, even though it's essentially new construction, a lot of times they won't comp it to new construction. And so you run into situations where you get a lot of bad comps sometimes, where they're comparing it to a lived-in house that's not been completely updated. Might have old galvanized plumbing, it might have old lath and plaster, it might have all these things that an appraiser, they're just not smart enough to really know that there's value in replacing all that stuff, or they just don't realize it, or give it any value in the report. So there's less appraisal problems, there's less underwriting problems. A lot of times we've had issues where underwriters will say the same things that some buyer's agent says. Well, you paid this, 4 months ago. Why is it worth that? And they need 2 appraisals, and they want to see copies of invoices and this and that. There's never any of that with new construction. So it's like the more accepted way for us to make money in the conventional financial world. They just don't seem to care what it is that we paid for the dirt or the teardown, whether it be for the buyers, the agents, the underwriters, the appraisers. It just doesn't matter to people. So something to keep in mind. And then number 7, and the last one, is that it becomes a process that you can conveyor belt. You can rinse and repeat, and you can do that fairly easily. And so when I say rinse and repeat, once you get a plan that works in a part of town, like we built the same plan or variations of the same plan, 3 or 4 times in first edition last year, and we basically rinse and repeat. We changed a few of the selections. We changed some of the siding details to make it look a little different from the outside. But when you rinse and repeat, you know exactly what it's going to cost. There's not a whole lot of work that goes into, we're not designing a new floor plan. We're not designing a new house. It's just basically the same house when we rebuild it. And so, you can do that, not all the time, but, you can when you're working in areas that have pretty standard sized lots. And, the lots, it's not a real hilly area. You don't have some lots that are flat, other lots have big hillsides, things like that. So there is the potential to rinse and repeat and just make it more of a conveyor belt process, which is a lot easier because when you do big rehabs, each project is a monumental undertaking in terms of figuring out what the new floor plan is going to be and working on that. And, each one of them is just, it's a big undertaking. And so to be able to build a project that has a huge profit margin and just be able to rinse and repeat on a number of them, it's a big advantage. So that's something that I definitely wanted to mention. All right, so those are the biggest reasons why, I think you should transition to new construction. Obviously, money is a big thing. I mentioned profit margins, but bottom line is we make a lot more money on our new construction on the average than we do on rehabs. Now, we have had some big swacks on rehabs lately, but at the end of the day, right now, there's a lot of people trying to joust for rehab. So, you know, your profit margins are going to be, you know, you will get bigger ones, but you just have a lot of people jousting for them. So if you can do new construction, I think it gives you more opportunity to make a lot more money right now and moving forward. But that's just my 2 cents. So let's talk about what you need to make the transition. So let's talk about the actual sticks and bricks part of it here, the subcontractors kind of filling the void. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take this to the point of where it becomes a rehab, right? Or what it is that you guys are comfortable with. So I want to take it to the point where we basically have a shell of a house, right? Because if you do a gut rehab, you're basically going to tear everything apart and then you're going to put it back together. So what I want to do is take this to the point that it is a gut rehab, where it's basically, you know, doing all the things that you would do in a gut rehab. So let's start with, obviously, you've got to identify the product, right? So whether the product is a rehab or a tear down, you identify the product. We've gone through that. We don't need to spend too much time on it. But let's say you found a house. It's in an area that would substantiate high enough price points that new construction works. You get the property locked up for a price that's lot cost or below. And you move forward with doing your new construction. So let's just create that hypothetical situation in everybody's minds. So the first thing you got to do, obviously, is you got to tear down the house. But before you tear down the house, you've got one big issue, and that's going to be asbestos. So you got to make sure that, well, asbestos and oil tanks, you know, it could go either way, because when you do the excavation, I'll get into that, you can just remove the oil tank. You don't have to necessarily bring in the overpriced outfits that do the excavation for you, because your excavator can just pull it and pull all the dirt too, and it'll cost you all this money. But before you get there, you have to remove asbestos. So you got to do asbestos removal in the old house. And generally, in most cities now, once you complete that asbestos removal and the asbestos remediation company gives you a clean bill of health that all the asbestos has been removed out of the house, you can then give that report to the city with your money for the demo permit, because you have to get a permit to actually tear down the existing house. So a lot of times they won't issue that permit until you have your asbestos paperwork saying that all the asbestos has been removed out of the house. So when they knock it down, it won't put asbestos fibers in the air and give everybody mesothelioma. So that's the reason behind it. So you're going to need an asbestos remediation contractor. Generally, we're paying anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a house. As long as it's a house with just a reasonable amount of asbestos in it. If you get a house that has a ton of it, it's going to be more. But generally, we're paying between $3,000 and $5,000 a house to get our asbestos remediated. So then once that's done, you can move on to the excavator portion of what needs to be done. Now, excavator is going to be, you know, some of you may have excavator contractors that you use now if you're doing big additions and pouring new foundation, but if not, that's going to be something that you need to, or a subcontractor that you need to find. And excavators, you know, we've been through a lot of them. Right now, they're a little bit greedy, and they tend to be, a lot of them tend to be a bit of a pain in the ass. And, you know, you're dealing with the blue collar of the blue collar in terms of subs, because they're driving big machinery, they're muddy all the time. That's just who they are. And so, you know, they also make big investments in these machineries. So they, you know, they try and get that back as quick as they can in terms of charges. So don't be afraid to shop excavation companies. We've had a big variation in pricing, but you're going to need an excavator at the end of the day. And so the excavation company that you're going to pick are going to be the ones that can actually tear down the old house and remove it. So they'll tear it down, they'll put it in dumpsters, and they'll haul it off as long as all the asbestos is out of it. And they'll make sure that they take care of all of that for you, so that now the house is gone. Another thing that they'll do at that point, depending on whether or not your city requires it or not, is they'll cap the existing sewer line. So a lot of times, you know, the sewer line runs underground into the house. Well, when they're digging out the old house and tearing it down, they're tearing out the foundation or the slab foundation, whichever it's on, you know, the sewer line's coming in there as well. They have to locate that, and basically they cap it at the point that they, you know, they rip out the line to a certain point, and then they cap it until you're going to put in a new line. So that's something that they'll do as well. So they basically remove the house, they cap the sewer line, and now you have an empty lot where the old house sat that's pretty much ready for construction. And so that's phase one, which is getting the lot cleared so that now you can get it ready for construction of the new house. Now, if any of you guys remember, I posted a lot of pictures of our $2 million house that we just sold at the beginning part of the construction process. I kind of took it all the way to where I'm going to talk about today. So I took it from when we knocked down the old house to when we did everything up to the point that basically we were framing walls and floors and you know, the roof line and everything else. And so if you want to go back in the Facebook group, you know, I made sure to post all the pictures along the way so that you can kind of put a lot of the things that I'm talking about here, you know, visually see it as well if you want to go back and check out those posts. So I just wanted a little side thought there. So now the lot's cleared, right? Now you got to figure out what it is that you're going to do with that lot. And so this is where obviously you're going to need an architect. This is where the second person comes in. And so architects, you know, there's a wide variety. I've been complaining about one of the architectural companies that we're using right now on our Facebook group for the last couple of days. And basically what we found with architects is the best ones for us tend to be the guys that run their own operation. It's like a one-man shop. Now, we've used guys that are the one-man shop in the past that or very, very small operation that didn't work out, but we've had a guy now that we've used for years. And so we didn't have him do our townhome project that I'm having the problems with because the company that we decided to use said they could do a whole bunch of stuff in-house. They could do the surveying, they could do the engineering, they could do the plans. And so we thought we'd give them a try because it'd be easier because Joni, my wife, we had just had a kid at the time, our daughter, and so we just wanted to try and make it a little simpler while we were in that kind of messy personal time. And so it ended up backfiring because they're just not good. It takes a while to get changes. They're not very attentive. And so my point is if you find an architect that's just kind of a one-man band, runs his own operation, you are a much more important part of his business. And so when you have issues or you're trying to create a plan, you get their full undivided attention. And so at the beginning phase here, like I'm talking about when it comes to plan creation, that's very important because we've had problems right now with our architects on our townhomes where we had our initial plan creation meeting and we went through everything that we wanted. They said, great, we'll make it happen. And a lot of that stuff didn't actually happen, which we're finding out, which we probably should have checked things a little more thoroughly once, you know, plans were done. But you shouldn't have to check everybody's work constantly when you've already told them and set the expectations of what's wanted. And so to not have to deal with that if you find an architect that's in a smaller firm or a one-man band operation, you're going to get their full undivided attention and they're going to want to please more. And so that's why I would say, you know, finding an architect like that is a good thing. So a little segue there, but it's important to, you know, hear what I had to say on that. So once the lot's cleared, you got to come up with a plan that you're going to build. Now, one thing that I would suggest if you're just starting and making the transition, try and copy a plan that another builder has built in the same area. Reason being is twofold. Number one is you've got something to go from for the architect to basically copy and create a new plan. But number two is that builder likely wouldn't have built that house, and you want to make sure it's a spec builder, not a custom builder, because if it's a custom home, the costs could be outrageous for a spec builder. It's a totally different market. So you want to find a house that's sold in the area by a spec builder, and you can copy the plan, improve the plan. I would suggest improving it where you think it needs to be improved, because a lot of builder plans can be improved. But it'll keep your costs in line, because they wouldn't have built that house if the cost to build it were outside of the realm of reasonable to be able to then make a profit. So that would be my suggestion as you build your first house and you make this transition. Try and find another one in the area, similar price point, that has been built and sold from another knockdown, you know, new build type situation. Copy it, improve it, you know, change some of the siding detail. You can change some of the elevation if you want to make it look like you didn't totally copy them, but it's a great way to kind of do what somebody's already done, improve it, keep your costs in line, and keep this part of the process as simple as possible as you first venture into new construction. So once the architect you get a plan, you want to copy, he creates it. At that point, you know, he'll do his magic, he'll create the plan, he'll get it engineered, and then from there, you're going to have to submit it. And so this is the part that a lot of people don't, you know, you just don't, it's kind of a big black hole. What do you do, right? Well, you get the plan, and every city or municipality is going to have their new construction plans package that you have to submit. And part of that is basically it goes through planning, it goes through their engineering, it goes through their stormwater management, It goes through all the different facets of the city that has to approve all the different facets of the plan. And then once that's approved, they issue you your permit to build a new house. Now, there's a service that we've used in the past, and we're using it now for one of our projects. It's called Faster Permits here in Portland. And basically what they do is they do all the running. They get the plans and the package put together from the architect. They deliver them to the city. They follow up with it, and they basically do all the brain damage type work in dealing with the city and getting all that stuff submitted, and doing all the paperwork and following up. They do all that for you, and it's pretty inexpensive. So, you know, that's something that if you guys don't have a project manager yet, or you don't have a designer that's in-house or something like that, I would really look at utilizing a service like that, because it will take hours and hours of work off of your plate, and it's well worth the cost that you pay them. I can tell you that, that's for sure. Again, the company that we use here in Portland occasionally is called Faster Permits, and so I'm sure there's knockoff companies everywhere that do the same thing. So that's something that's important. So once you get your plans through, at that point, and they're approved, they're gonna issue your permit. Now, your permit is gonna cost money. That's the other thing. So depending on what market you're in and how much building permits cost, you know, it's gonna vary pretty dramatically. The one thing I will tell you is that if you're tearing down one house and you're building two in its place, the cost of the newly created lot, the building permit for that is going to be likely substantially more than the building permit for the existing lot. So if you tear down one house and you build one house in its place, the cost is going to be much different than if you tear down one and you build two. And so one of the building permits for the newly created lot is likely going to be a lot more than what they consider the existing lot, because there was one house on the lot before. So that's something that you're going to want to get familiar with both ways, whether you're tearing down one and building one, or if you tear down one and build two, what the disparity between the permit costs are going to be. Because basically you're going to be tapping city services or city utilities with the newly created house, and so that's the reason why a lot of times it's a lot more money. So something to think about. But once you get that and it's approved, now you need your surveyor. Well, your surveyor is going to need to survey the lot ahead of time too, so I probably should have mentioned that. Before you get the plans done, you have to have a survey, and so your architect's going to make sure that you get a survey done before he does his plans, and then you submit the plans to the city. But once you get the plans approved, surveyor is going to come back into the picture, and you're going to have them utilize the plans to stake out the house. So they basically stake out the house on the lot, and then from there, they work with the excavators to actually dig out for the new house. So the excavator's job is to utilize the plans and the stake out from the surveyors, and then they're supposed to obviously, on the plans, and it'll show grade, it'll show heights, it'll show all these things, and then their job is to review the plans and then dig out according to them, so that you've got proper heights and everything lines up the way that it should on the plans, or the way that it shows on the plans. So at that point, you've got surveyor still involved, you've got excavator involved, they're doing the dig out. They're also, the excavators are also going to be responsible for putting in your new utilities. So they'll run the rain drains, they'll run your new sewer line. Those are the types of things that they'll do during dig out for the foundation. Or at least they'll get them ready to go, and they can finalize them once the foundation company comes in and puts the foundation in. But let's say let's just leave the utilities alone for right now. So they dig out for the new house. They basically, everything's been removed. They dig out, and then at that point, you need the foundation company to come in, and what they do is they set forms. So they'll come in and they'll set forms based on the plan for where the new foundation runs exactly. Now, sometimes the excavation company, depending on whether or not you had a basement in the house that was there before and you don't have a basement in the new house, they'll need to bring in gravel and compact it and make sure that they have a solid surface to set the new foundation on and fill in any big holes that were there from the previous house. So that can be a wrinkle in your cost for excavation, because it costs quite a bit more to bring in a lot of gravel and compact it versus not having to do that. Just a little side something there to think about. So once it's dug out by the excavators, the foundation company comes in, they set the foundation forms, they pour the foundation. Once that's done, they strip the forms. Obviously, you have to have this all inspected each stage by the city inspectors, and which they outline in when they issue your permit at what point you need everything inspected, and that way you don't move on to the next phase before one phase is fully approved. So once that's done and the forms are stripped, then the excavation company can come back. They can finalize your utilities in terms of installing, rain drains, sewer line, things like that. And then from there, basically you've got a foundation that's sitting in the ground, you've got your utilities roughed in, and now you're moving on to the next phase, which is going to be doing your initial framing. And so from there you get your lumber package delivered, and so you'll need a lumber provider, and we use a company called Par Lumber, which is provides to a lot of builders around here. And so what we do is we actually give the plans to the lumber company, and they do the takeoff for us, and they basically create the lumber package, and then from there they deliver it in sections depending on what we're working on. But the initial framing package will show up, the framers will frame. At that point, I posted a lot of pictures about this, again, in the Facebook group when we built our $2 million house. You can basically see they do the underfloor framing, and from there you're going to need your plumbers to come in, and they do the underfloor plumbing. Then your HVAC company comes in, they do your underfloor HVAC, and then from there you deck it, which means you put the floor down for the main floor so that the framers can continue to go up. Now, one thing that I want to mention is you're going to need temp power when you do new construction, because a lot of times if you've done big rehabs, a lot of you guys have probably disconnected power and you've needed temp power, but all the contractors need power to some extent, and so you're going to need to get temp power going. And it usually takes a couple weeks to get temp power approved, and you got to put a big pull up, and you got to put a little sub panel on there, and so you'll need an electrician, and they'll have to work with the power company in order to get that done. So that's something to just think about. Now, once you get to the decking's down and the floor's built, you can start framing walls and going up. That's the point where you're probably going to run into a number of questions from your framers along the way, and this is, again, another point where it's important to have a good relationship with your architect and have an architect that's responsive, because if you don't, then you could lose your framing crew. You know, they could get irritated because they're not responding in a timely manner to help them deal with solutions or submit changes to the city where needed, and get that through quickly so they can continue framing the house. So that's a point of contention. That's what we're dealing with right now in our townhomes. So something to think about. So at that point, the house is basically what it is, right? If you were going to do a big rehab, you've gotten to that point, and those are really the only differences. Now, the only difference beyond that, like once you get to the finished product and you sell it, is that most states require a builder warranty of some sort. Here in Oregon, we're required to basically give homeowners a 1-year warranty, and so this is something that's really important. I believe we put our warranty up on the DFA website that we use. You know, this is a warranty that costs a lot of money for an attorney to draft up, so it's something that you guys can kind of work from if you want to, if you're going to get into new construction. But it basically outlines a number of things. Number one, it outlines everything that's covered by the warranty and everything that's not, because that's super important. And it also outlines the repair schedule, exactly when you can expect us to come back and fix any of the things that are warrantable. This is the one wrinkle and the one thing with new construction that you don't necessarily have to do with rehabs. You know, it's not usually a huge pain in the ass, but it's something that you need to at least plan on. So we basically come back at the 11-month mark. We get people to submit their warrantable repair list, and literally we've had houses over the years where somebody submitted 3 items at that point, and they were super easy. And then we've had the pain in the ass people that don't want to abide by, you know, what it is that we outline, and I have to constantly have the conversation with them saying, look, you have to go by what our warranty says, and they make us think about it. So you're going to get a little bit of variance there, but the point is that you need to have that builder warranty in place. You need to have a process in place for dealing with people, whether they follow it or whether they choose not to, so that you can complete the warrantable repairs, and that'll just keep business running smoothly and you know, prevent people from being irritated with you and just, you know, giving your business a bad name or just having to deal with irritated people. So that's really the big things to think about in terms of differences or what you don't necessarily have to deal with in construction that you do have to with, or you don't have to deal with in construction with the rehab that you do with new construction. Now, outside of that, and the last thing I want to talk about before we can take some questions here, is the CCB license issue. So we're a licensed general contractor in the state of Oregon. I realize that a lot of you guys are in states where it's a lot harder to get licensed. Here in the state of Oregon, basically it's almost like a real estate licensing class. You take a class, well, you have to do a certain number of credit hours, and then you have to apply to take the test. once you take the test, you have to set up a company, you have to get licensed, you have to get bonded, insured, and then once you have those things, they'll actually issue you your contractor's license. And so that's really it. They'll turn a lot of people loose on the contracting world here that maybe don't know a lot. I know there's other states where you have to show tangible experience for a certain number of years, and that can be much more challenging. But I will say that, in states like that, though it's a bigger pain in the ass up front, if you can get through that barrier of entry, I think there's even a lot more opportunity on the back end, because there's just going to be a lot less people that end up doing it. But either way, you can always partner with a GC to some extent to have them, pull permits and things like that and basically run the job if in your state, there's a higher barrier of entry. Now, again, in our state, there is a barrier of entry, but it's not as high as saying that I need 4 years of construction-related experience or trade experience in addition to, the credit hours and taking a test. So something to think about there. But, at the end of the day, if you're going to be doing new construction on an ongoing basis, I would probably say, looking into getting licensed is something that would benefit you for sure. So that's pretty much the presentation, the important points. Dan, do we have any questions that are in the queue at this point, or if anybody has any, this would be a good time to blast away and we can talk about it.
Do you have any, I don't know if you mentioned it, but pricing for excavation and demo or a range? I know it can vary pretty widely, but what are we typically paying for that?
So knocking down an old house, let's say a 1,200 square foot house and under, probably one level and a basement, something like that, or, maybe it's a 2 level with a small upstairs or something. You're probably looking at around 10 grand, 8 to 10 grand to get the house knocked down and removed off the property. If it has a basement that has to be filled in and compacted, that could go up to 12 or 13 grand. Because again, they have to bring in gravel, they have to compact it. It's just a lot more labor intensive, and then they have to bring in materials. But so probably between 8 and 12 grand is what you're looking at for excavation for removing the existing house. Now, when you go into digging out for the new house, it really depends on your lot. If the more sloped your lot is and the more dirt that has to be moved around and taken off the lot or pushed around, the more expensive it's going to be. When we did Street of Dreams 3.5 years ago or whatever it was, we had to take 90 dump truck loads of dirt out of that lot because it was a hillside that we built into. It didn't look like it had that much slope to it, but it did once we actually started, building. And so we had to take 90 loads of dirt out of there. It ended up costing us, almost $100,000. I think it was like $110,000 for excavation on that particular lot. So you can see how excavation can be your wild card. So when you have a sloped lot, just be wary of what the excavation costs are going to be, especially when you have a sloped lot where you're actually going to have to take out a lot of dirt in order for the house to fit on there. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. And then do you have a ballpark price range of the cost of an architect?
Yeah, it's going to vary too. If you're doing a rinse and repeat type plan, you're probably, I don't know, $2 to $3 a square foot is probably what they'll charge you, somewhere in there. The higher end places, I think we were paying over $4 a square foot for a higher end place that we used during Street of Dreams. But, I would say that it's going to run you anywhere between $2 and $4 a square foot for an architect, just depending. The smaller the operation, the less overhead, probably closer to that, the lower end of that range. The higher, the bigger the operation, the more overhead they're carrying, the higher end of that range. So, if you fall somewhere in the middle with somebody that's attentive and cares about you and is a smaller operation, I would say that's a win.
Is there any special ways of finding like a mom and pop architect, one-man band?
Yeah, I mean, you can just look up architects in your area. Getting referrals from other builders or rehabbers is great. That would be the best way, I think. But, if you look up architects and you see that their business address is a residential address, that's usually a pretty good indicator that they're a one-man band or a very, very small shop, as opposed to, some type of corporate or, commercial address.
Do you budget it ahead of time for the 11-month punch list? If so, what do you typically budget?
I don't budget. I don't have a particular line item for it, but I just kind of plan that, you know, it's probably going to cost us anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000 in labor and time and everything else. Most of the time, you know, the stuff that we're fixing are like nail pops and drywall repairs, but the drywall company that we use actually has a warranty department if you use them for all of your the entire house of new construction. So they'll come back and they will actually do the repairs in the drywall for you, you know, if it's cracking or there's nail pops that need to be pounded in. And so it's really, even if we had to pay for it, it wouldn't be that much money, but they actually have a drywall department, and that would be, you know, that's the majority of the stuff that we're fixing. You know, there's obviously caulking and things like that we'll come back and we'll have, you know, we'll redo some caulking. Our tile guy will come back, and if grout's separating, he'll redo some grout. Just little stuff like that. So it really doesn't end up being a lot. It's just little punch list stuff that you just try and make the house look new again in terms of the little punch list stuff for people before we're, you know, out of their lives forever.
I know it depends on the project, but what's the average timeline start to finish for new builds?
5 to 6 months from breaking ground to finishing. So we finished our Noss Road project, the one we just sold a couple weeks ago for $2 million. We finished it first week of October, and I think we started, I don't know, sometime in April-ish, actually digging out for the new house, something like that.
How much do the faster permits people charge?
I think they charge like $87 an hour, but they break it up. Like they don't charge for drive time. They literally charge for time talking to people while they're at the city or on the phone trying to find answers, things like that. So it's a pretty nominal amount of money at the end of the day for the amount of brain damage that you save, and especially if you don't have any idea what you're doing at first in terms of who to talk to and where to go and all that. Well worth the cost to find an outfit like that.
And can you reiterate again when the plumber and electricians come in to do the utilities?
Yeah, so after you get foundation in and you get your underfloor framing done, which is basically putting the sill plate on, you know, they put in the posts that support the joists, then they run the joists, they set them, and at that point, before they deck the floor there, the plumbers will come in and they'll do the underfloor plumbing, which basically means that they run the waste lines, they connect it to the sewer line, they stub in all of the supply water lines, they bring your water line to the house if you're running a new water line. They put in all the stuff that's in the crawl space area before you put the floor on, and then your HVAC guys come in and they'll run all of the ducting on the underfloor area that you're going to have, and then at that point then you can bring the framers back and they can start, you know, they deck the floor and then they start framing walls and going up. And then once the house is framed, then you bring everybody back in terms of your plumbers. They basically bring the plumbing all the way up through the main floor to the second floor. You bring the HVAC guys in, they bring they connect the ducting, they put in the actual furnace units, and they take the ducting up to whatever the first floor and second floor, and then you have the electrician come in and then they actually hardwire the house with all the electrical as well.
So I think you already touched on how they bill the fast track people, how they track their time, and then Dave had a follow-up. Can they do a flat fee, or is it traditionally just hourly?
It's traditionally hourly because every permit package is different in terms of time and issues and things that have to be dealt with. So usually they just have an hourly rate. But again, it's a pretty nominal fee. I wouldn't get too caught up on that. You know, for what it's going to cost you, for what it's going to do for you in the beginning, it's well worth the money.
All right, Brandon has a long one here. I bought the teardowns product and have been researching areas to market to for the last few months. Oakland had about 12 new construction homes since 2015, so it seems almost non-existent, minus condos and townhouses here. The other outlying areas are multi-million-dollar areas. Would you consider add-on construction a happy medium for my farm area, or would you recommend that I go after these whales? You know, I know you've been doing a lot of add-on type construction.
I'm curious why that number's only 12 for Inner Oakland, and my guess is that the permitting side of it is just a friggin' nightmare for new construction down there within, closer in there within the Oakland area or whatever, downtowns or whatever that's considered. I would bet there's more red tape to deal with by, a multiple of about 100 than probably most other major metros, which is why you're only seeing that. Because you do have a lot of older housing there from what I've seen and talked to you. And so, I guess I would figure that out first. What are your barriers of entry in terms of that brain damage and that red tape to do the new construction? And then once you figure that out completely, you can make an educated decision on whether or not that can be done easily in those areas, or whether it can be done in those areas and what you're up against. Obviously, it can get done, but it's just a matter of, how long of a waiting game is it? How long does it take to get permit? I mean, are people waiting 24 months for permits? Is that why nobody does it? Because if that's the case, that would make sense, right? Because now you're sitting on money for so long and the market could change and this and that kind of deters you. So if that's the case, then add-on rehabs, that's why it's a better option when you can do it. But if, again, on the flip side, if there's only 12 new construction homes getting built in those areas since 2015, if you can get one built, guess what? It's going to be a hot property, right? Because it's brand new. There's no functional obsolescence that you're fighting with creating a new floor plan within an old house. Everything's new. That property will sell for top dollar. So there's probably a lot of money to be made with it. So I don't know. I would investigate that process a little more, find out what you're up against. And, if you can get around the hurdles, you know how to generate inventory now. And inventory for that is virtually the same as the big add-on remodel stuff. Figure it out, and you could probably make an absolute killing if you can figure out everything to get around it and how to make it feasible.
Yeah, he sent along a link as well, so we can check that out afterwards.
Okay.
Jared wants to know, if I were to hire an experienced builder to build on a lot I sourced, what would be a typical markup for managing the project?
Anywhere between 10 and 20%. Is probably what you're going to find. It just varies. I've got a buddy that I play hoops with that he's bought a piece of property, split it into 5 lots, and he hired a builder to build. And the builder basically gave him a cost per square foot price that's all inclusive of building it, what he charges, and warranty stuff. And so, that would be probably the best way to figure out whether or not it makes sense for you to do that. Because then you know what you're going to be all in, you know what you're trying to sell them for, and he's doing that up in Vancouver because he's obviously not licensed, but he likes to play in the real estate game. So there are guys that do that for sure, but he runs a business on full-time packaging business. That's his full-time gig, so that's why he's hiring a GC to do this stuff on the side, or the GC is doing it full-time, but he's kind of dabbling in real estate on the side, and that's why he has this arrangement. But generally they'll give you a number, a cost per square foot number. Now, one thing I'll caution you to is if they give you a cost per square foot number and you don't have plans or a lot picked out, it's a bullshit number. It's fictitious because, the cost per square foot is dictated by the plan and the lot. So he can give you that number ahead of time, but it doesn't matter if you don't have plans or a lot picked out. So hopefully that makes sense.
Garrett was just wanting to confirm underfloor plumbing is not necessary if you have basements, correct?
Well, if you have basements, you still got to run, they obviously aren't running it they're running some stuff in the slab, right? So you're going to have to set up some of your plumbing ahead of time. You've got, your sewer, your waste lines and things like that. So depending on how your basement's set up, I mean, if it's a half basement, it's a little easier sometimes than if it's a full. So it just depends, but, you're going... If you're doing basements, it's going to be a little bit different order than if you're not, but it's the same idea. You get the rough stuff in, you get the foundation poured, and then you bring everybody back after they, get the initial, the sill plate on. They get the floor joists set for the first floor, which basically would put if you either have a floor, a crawl space, you have a basement below there, right? The only difference is the basement, you've got taller walls that are going to get poured for foundation, and then you have an actual slab on the bottom as opposed to just dirt. So It's fairly similar. It's just they'd have to set a few things ahead of time before they pour, like the waistline and things like that. And your sewer line would have to run out deeper than it would otherwise, right? Because it's got to run out of the bottom of the basically under the slab of the basement. Otherwise, you're not going to have fall for your toilet.
So David just had a follow-up on the faster permits type people. Is there a way to confirm that they're doing the work they're actually doing? I mean, is there a way to track them, or is it basically just...
Yeah, so when they give me, and I'm sure, virtually all these companies are set up this way, they literally give me a minute-by-minute accounting of what the bill represents. So, what did they deal with for exactly, I mean, like they got stopwatch time on it almost, like what did they deal with from here to here and here to here and here to here, and then I get the full breakdown of that, which from there you can basically determine almost where you're at with the plan package, right? So.
All right, and then when do you provide the warranty to the buyer, at closing or before?
Before, so we give it to them within, basically the 3 days or the 2 days that were required before we give them property disclosure forms. I give them the warranty at that point as well so that they can review it, and if they have any issues with it, we know right then and there. So I give it to them way early in the process. They have it before their due diligence period really even starts, and that seemed to work out really well for us.
So your wife's a designer, but for those of us who have a school teacher for a wife, would you recommend getting a designer to work with the architect?
Yeah, probably. It depends on the price points that you're building in. If you're building kind of lower end, maybe not lower end, but, more low to mid-level housing, design isn't quite as important as just floor plan and functionality. It's as you kind of go up in the marketplace that you need to be more aware of your design, and you need to actually, if you don't have anybody that can design in-house, that you probably should bring in the help of somebody to help with selections and things like that for your surfaces. The architects, some are better than others with, floor plan and marketability and understanding how it all ties together, door swings, all that type of stuff. Does a designer, can you hire them to do all that stuff? Probably not all in one anyway. I mean, Joni looks at the plans and she does our surface selections and everything else and kind of works through it. So she kind of does two people's jobs. But, if you get a good architect, I mean, most builders, they don't have designers go through their plans. They go through them with the architect themselves, and then they use designers maybe once or twice to pick out selections in terms of the surfaces, and then they just rinse and repeat, and they build the same thing, the same selections over and over again. So, I mean, unless you're looking to do a whole bunch of new construction, maybe you get a little bit of help with your design one time, and if you can build a similar plan to that over and over, you can always rinse and repeat.
As a follow-up to that, do you have any tips on finding a good designer, and about how much does a designer cost these days?
They vary. Designers, that's going to be the big void in this business. Most of them don't have, there's something in their brain that doesn't connect functionality and budget. There's a big void there. So there's no magic answer there. You just have to talk to some and, find out if you've got the, chandelier foofy-poofy designer, or if you have one that's a little more down to earth and recognizes the difference between price points and what's required and how that plays into marketability and, return on investment, things like that. So it's just going to take a little work and talking to people.
Should we use a GC that specializes in new construction, or is it fine to go with the same GC for rehabs?
Depends on how much experience they have. If they've never built a house from the ground up, I would suggest maybe finding somebody who has, because they're very susceptible to making a lot of the same mistakes you would make in the initial phases, So it just depends on how much confidence you have in the GC that you've got, and how much real experience they have, with the initial parts of new construction.
That's all I have for now.
Okay. One of the things that can happen in the beginning is if you have a GC or a project manager and you're dealing with your excavation company and they don't set the heights right in terms of their dig outs, you know, that can be a big problem. So that's why I say if you don't have a GC that's actually, you know, comfortable looking at plans and talking to the excavators and making sure that everything is, you know, dug out to the right heights, that can be a big problem for you. One of the first ones that we did, the excavator, fortunately we were in the city of Portland, which didn't have a height restriction. City like Oswego has a height restriction on that, as tall as the house can be, or you have to tear it down so until it meets the height restriction. But the first house that we ever built, the excavator didn't dig it down far enough, and we ended up having like 5 more stairs up to the front door than we wanted. And ultimately that hurt our marketability, and so it's something that we pay a lot of close attention to now. So if you have a GC running it that isn't aware of those potential problems and can deal with them at the point of dig out and recognize them, then, you know, it's something they need to know and they need to know how to identify, and they need to know, you know, they need to be familiar with. So
David just had a final question. He might partner with a GC for his first project. What would you think would make sense? Is either a split or a flat fee paid?
I mean, if you're partnering or hiring, if you're partnering, I might give them a percentage. I definitely wouldn't give them a split, because what's his alternative, right? He's not an investor, he's a GC. So maybe you give him 25%, right? Something like that to, or whatever you think makes him happy and want to teach you all the time. Because if you're going to partner and you're going to give up money, you want to get knowledge in return. So whatever you think makes him happy. I don't think you got to give up half by any means, but, you know, maybe around that 25-30% number, you'll make somebody happy enough that you can learn everything that you need to learn to then potentially venture on your own after that if you want to.
Yeah, he said he's signing off on me for me to get my GC license. I was thinking 25%.
Okay, so we're thinking about the same thing. So. Cool. Is that pretty much all the questions at this point?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're about at the hour mark, so if you guys have any additional questions that you think of, feel free to just post them on the Facebook group, and I can chime in as I get time. Brandon, you're welcome. You know, there's a lot to it, but there's not a lot to it. I mean, it's, you know, it's just a part of the business that a lot of us don't deal with on a daily basis, and you know, it's just kind of figuring out exactly what those things are. And once you do, it's really a pretty simple process. And it provides a lot more opportunity for you and your business at the end of the day if you can get comfortable with it. So anyway, if you got any other questions, feel free to post them in the Facebook group. Otherwise, thanks for attending, and we'll see you on the next webinar.